Hi everyone, welcome to another WeatherCast USA quick brief forecast, and we want to take a little deeper dive into the multi-day severe weather outbreak that is setting up in the Central Plains as well as the Midwest late week. I want to start off with the current look here in the Continental US, and as you can see we have pretty much a ridge in the west and troughing in the east. There's a reinforcing low pressure system and trailing cold front that's going to swing through the Great Lakes and East Coast here over Tuesday into Wednesday, sparking possibly some severe weather here in mid-Michigan, as well as there's a possibility of some severe weather along the Red River later this afternoon. Otherwise, mostly just showers and general thunderstorms as this reinforcing cold shot comes through the Great Lakes and into the East Coast. Not worried with this system about a widespread severe weather outbreak, although like I said, there is some possible isolated severe weather in Michigan and possibly into the Chicago area. So as we put the map into motion, we can really see what happens with the setup for the next severe weather outbreak. Still have troughing in the east. The ridge that is on the west coast right now will move east, and that taps Gulf of Mexico moisture instability, setting up the next low pressure system coming out of the Pacific coast. That low pressure system deepens, and it's a negatively tilted trough around northeastern Colorado, western Nebraska. You can see the flow around that trough like this, and still have the Gulf of Mexico moisture and instability streaming north, and that really sets up the severe weather potential Thursday into Friday and Saturday. But a little bit more of a unique situation once the first low pressure continues its northeastern push and eventually crosses it over the Great Lakes and into Canada. Instead of being replaced by calm weather and general troughing, you can see this trough actually continues back to the west coast, where a deeper low pressure system will then come out of the four corners and eject into the southern plains on Saturday into Sunday. Now there's still some model disagreement on how strong this low pressure system is going to be, but in general it's another negatively tilted trough ejecting somewhere out into Colorado and then the southern and central plains. And you can see that here by Monday, that low pressure system is somewhere in the upper Great Lakes, setting up for potential severe weather set up for the Ohio River Valley and then the lower Great Lakes. So diving in now at the temperatures, and I'm using the GEFS. It's a ensemble of the various runs of the GFS. Ensembles gives us a nice general outlook at things. So by Thursday afternoon, you can see that pattern here with the ridging developing in the central part of the country. And with that, the temperatures are going to increase comparative to midweek. You can see reaching up into the 70s and 80s in the Texas Panhandle, much of Oklahoma, and then much of central and western Kansas. That's going to be part of the setup that fires off severe storms on Thursday. And then on Friday, you can see even a broader swath of the country is into those warm and unstable temperatures, with the 70s and 80s even pushing up the Missouri River into the Omaha area by Friday afternoon, and mid-80s pushing up into southern Kansas as well as much of Oklahoma. On Saturday, those warmer temperatures stretch up all the way into the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. We still have the warm temperatures here in the southern plains, and that fuels a threat for severe weather from the Great Lakes all the way into the Red River Valley and North Texas on Saturday. And that'll continue even Sunday and Monday potentially, with the warmer weather from the mid-Mississippi Valley and East Coast and Great Lakes. So we can see again with dew points, current dew points aren't that bad. Most of the instability is confined to Texas and the Gulf Coast. You can see that the models do show that low pressure and cold front that reinforces the cool air on the East Coast does draw a little bit higher dew points up than models were originally thinking a few days ago. So we can see even 50s dew points up into the St. Louis area and central Illinois, and mid-40s dew points up here where there might be a little bit of severe weather around Lake Michigan later this afternoon. By Thursday, we can really see the setup here with a dry line in western Kansas into the Texas Panhandle, much like we saw last week. And then the GEFS shows pretty good dew points for severe weather up into the southern parts of Nebraska, with mid-60s dew points stretching back into Kansas, much of Oklahoma, northwestern Arkansas, and North Texas. Texas also has higher dew points showing in the models, with even close to 70 dew points reaching into the DFW area. You can see that shift a little bit Friday with the dry line and cold front moving through central and western Oklahoma and also West Texas, with those higher dew points pushing up close to the Nebraska and Iowa border, much of Missouri, western Illinois, eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then down into the Arklatex. And then by Saturday, that shifts a little bit east with some really high dew points in the 70s showing up into the Arklatex, and as well as some higher dew points into the 60s showing up in the lower Great Lakes, lower Michigan, the Chicago area, southern Wisconsin, and then back through southeastern Iowa, much of Missouri, eastern Kansas, and about the I-35 corridor. And one of the reasons why I think there's a possibility of severe weather, especially still into the Ohio Valley on Monday, as the low pressure system continues moving north and east, there's still a good amount of instability down here into the Ohio Valley and Tennessee Valley and mid-Mississippi valleys. Looking at more ingredients that are going to fuel this multi-day severe weather outbreak, taking a look at the Cape, that's convective available potential energy. We can again see that there's not much, but there is a little bit of Cape energy here in lower Michigan and the Chicago area, southeastern Wisconsin. If the reinforcing cold front does fire any storms, there's some Cape here in the Red River Valley part of Texas if any isolated storms do develop here later this afternoon. But the main ingredients for Cape really start showing on Thursday, especially late Thursday evening and into the nighttime on Thursday. You can really see that Cape pouring north from the Gulf of Mexico into western Texas, the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and western Kansas. That likely is going to create an environment a lot like we saw last week, with isolated development here in those locations. Any development that does get going on Thursday evening and overnight has a potential for all hazards, with hail and gusty winds being the two primary ones. There's a bit of a cap on Thursday afternoon, similar to what we saw last week, will prevent a widespread outbreak of severe storms in these areas on Thursday. Any storms that do break that cap, though, could become severe with the ingredients coming together, and all hazards are possible. On Friday, that area of Cape and instability shifts a little bit further east. Again, we can see how that is interacting with the cold front and dry line that moves along the I-35 corridor. Just ahead of that, though, models are picking up on a fairly skinny area, but a good enough area of some higher Cape values in eastern Oklahoma, the DFW, and northeastern Texas towards Texarkana, a little bit of western Missouri and eastern Kansas. Also, you can see some of that Cape wrapping up around the low pressure system. That could create another area of severe storms in the Missouri River Valley around eastern Nebraska and western Iowa. The Omaha area in particular could see a round of severe weather on Friday with that. Now, this far out, the models could be overdoing a little bit of the Cape here on Saturday, but the GFS is picking up on a pretty substantial area of available energy stretching from the Missouri and Iowa border all the way down into southwest Missouri, southern Kansas, much of eastern Oklahoma, and then also into the Red River and Arklatex. Saturday, if the models do verify, has the broadest area of high Cape, as you can see here, indicating in those red and purple and orange colors. And then particularly on Sunday, you can see some of those higher Cape values, again in the Arklatex, all the way up into the Iowa and Missouri border. Much of western Missouri has a pretty good amount of Cape. And then on Monday, we're going to have to watch. The models are a little inconsistent at how much Cape is available for any storms that are ongoing or to refire in the Ohio Valley. There is some indications that there are some increase in Cape coming up through the mid-Mississippi Valley into the Ohio Valley, but we're a little far out to really get the details on where severe weather is likely to develop on Monday. But I would guess it's somewhere in this area here into the mid-Mississippi and then Ohio valleys, possibly up into the Great Lakes, especially if the system can tap any of that continued cape and pull that up through the Mississippi Valley. So one of the things that really helps to develop severe weather is looking at the wind profiles through the atmosphere. And this next one will show us our winds a little further off the ground. So you can see that cold front and low pressure system moving through the Great Lakes and Northeast here over Tuesday and Wednesday. And you can also see that ridge pattern developing with the trough ejecting out of the Rockies. And this is one of the reasons why the severe weather on Thursday in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas will be a little later, is because we see that trough ejection is a little bit slow and comes out late into the evening. And we can see on Friday as that low pressure system deepens, coming out of Colorado and into Nebraska, low pressure system here with that negative tilt, we can really see those higher values here. And then on Saturday, as our first area low pressure ejects out north and east into Canada, you can see that really broadens that area into the Great Lakes. But you can also see that next negatively tilted trough ejecting out of the Four Corners and into the southern plains here, a little bit lower of a track than the first low pressure system. And that's why on Saturday, that area of severe weather is likely a little bit lower. For the greatest area of severe weather is a little bit lower into the Red River Valley, Oklahoma, and then Kansas and Missouri, with some isolated to scattered severe weather further north into the Great Lakes. That energy continues with the negatively tilted trough into Sunday in Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas, and even up into Iowa and potentially western Illinois, as the low pressure system continues moving northeast over Nebraska, South Dakota, and eventually into Minnesota. And then similar to how we were discussing with Cape, as the low pressure system continues moving that northeast direction, on Monday, we do have some higher values showing up in the mid-Mississippi Valley, up through the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes. That is one of the other ingredients that could spark that severe weather Monday, although models are still a little inconsistent on how much available energy is going to be up in here. And then lastly, the composite reflectivity for the GFS. And here you can see that low pressure system creating some shower and storm activity in the Great Lakes, moving into the Northeast Tuesday into Wednesday. On Tuesday, you can see how the trailing edge of that cold front may spark a few isolated strong to severe storms in the Texas Panhandle and Red River. If those can fire, they have a potential for especially hail threat in the Red River Valley. In particular, this model isn't very bullish on anything, but you can see there's some clues of some development here, especially west of I-35 in Kansas and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. I do think if a storm or two breaks through the cap, there is potential here for some isolated severe weather on Thursday evening and then overnight into Friday. Eventually, though, overnight Thursday into Friday morning, the models do indicate development as the cap reduces, and that will spark strong storms in Texas and Oklahoma, moving through Kansas and into Missouri. The GFS, similar to last week, is picking up on the early convection lifting up north and east and opening the door for further convection. You can see even on this model, it shows the dry line and trailing cold front. If that can happen, we could get development back here into eastern Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and eastern Texas, especially if the initial round of storms clears out early enough to allow recovery of instability and warming with a clearing of clouds. So there may be on Friday a morning round of strong storms and then afternoon scattered severe storms with a bit of a 1-2 punch developing on Friday. And then on Saturday, we can see that next low pressure system ejecting out of the Four Corners and firing off storms in some of the same areas that will likely see severe weather Friday and Saturday. But this puts the I-35 corridor from Kansas City down through Oklahoma City and into the DFW area in North Texas back in play for more strong to severe thunderstorms, with the new low pressure system, the second low pressure system, ejecting out of the Rockies into the plains. And then a broader area of severe weather and storms possible from southern Minnesota and Iowa into the Chicago area and western Great Lakes, all the way down through eastern Texas on Sunday as that low pressure system lifts up north and east. And this model depicts, again, the low pressure system moving up through the Great Lakes into Canada on Monday. And any storms along the trailing cold front from the previous day's convection combined with instability and destabilization during the day, I think the primary threat on Monday would be from lower Michigan into the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Mississippi Valley, likely with a damaging wind threat and likely clusters of storms. The dynamics with the low pressure system moving up and away from some of the higher Cape values down here in the mid-Mississippi Valley kind of decouples the higher instability from some of the vorticity that you get around the low pressure. And we can see even the GFS is indicating some of those clustering of storms with potential damaging wind threats and embedded isolated QLCS type tornado circulations. So with a little bit of breakdown of those models, let's take a look at the Storm Prediction Center's forecast. You can see now that we're closer to the weekend, we have a day 3 outlook for severe weather that stretches into the southern parts of Nebraska, all the way through central and western Kansas, western Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, down into the Red River, a little larger marginal risk that stretches into much of Nebraska, eastern Kansas, the I-35 corridor, Oklahoma City, and down into the Texas Hill Country. There's still possibilities that there's going to be changes here by the SPC, potential for upgraded risk areas, and this has steadily expanded from when it was first seen in the day 6 outlook, and then day 5, day 4, and now day 3. So we'll see if there's changes as we get even closer to Thursday. Day 4, we just have the general slight risk. Again, as we get closer to the weekend, we'll get more specifics on the threat here. But already there is an outlook for the SPC, and that stretches from northwestern Iowa into western Illinois near St. Louis and in Missouri, and then down through the Ozarks, western Arkansas, and into the DFW area down towards Waco. That's your threat area on Saturday that the SPC currently has on the day 4 outlook. Day 5, we just see a little bit slightly westward shift of the severe weather outlook by the SPC. That includes central and southern Kansas, all the way up through Kansas City and right along the Missouri and Iowa border, around that area that there was a tornado 2 weeks ago in southern Iowa. And then much of western Missouri, the Ozarks down towards Fayetteville and Bentonville in Arkansas, and then much of Oklahoma and the DFW area and North Texas to about Waco. And then we can see that day 6 outlook. This is for eastern Iowa, southern Wisconsin, the Chicago area, much of Illinois, and much of Missouri, especially central and eastern Missouri, down through the Boot Heel, just west of Memphis, and covering much of Arkansas, and then down into the Arklatex, has that day 6 risk already highlighted by the Storm Prediction Center. So once again, that's a look at our back-to-back negatively tilted trough ejections here this coming week, with a broad trough developing with Gulf of Mexico moisture ahead of that, setting up a multi-day severe weather outbreak in the plains as well as the Midwest and into the Great Lakes from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and potentially even into Monday and early next week. We'll have this all covered with live severe weather streams, especially on the higher risk days, and then also QuickCast forecasts as the week continues and into early next week. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned. Have multiple ways to get severe weather warnings